Welcome back to the People Spark podcast.
I'm excited to continue our conversation about culture.
Let's do it.
So we left,
Yes.
or we paused,
Yes.
talking about how do you identify your culture and really not identify your culture and identify if there are gaps.
Right.
And even if there aren't gaps, I shouldn't even say it that way. If there are gaps, we want to close those gaps.
Or if it's not what you're wanting to see.
Yes. Or if it is, how do we solidify it?
Right.
Like, this works. How do we make sure it's going to stay
Keep it
going forward?
Yeah.
Because we can't just let that go to, you just can't let it happen. It has to be much more intentional.
It's not by
than that.
chance.
So I realized I'm jumping right in. I'm
Do
going
it.
to jump right in. Because we talk about the behaviors, right? Culture is a set of behaviors consistent of a specific group. So if you want to know your culture, watch your behaviors. And the spark from last week was start to identify those behaviors. What behaviors do you see? And you even said, don't judge them at the time.
Right.
Watch and listen. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? So that can tell you what's happening in your business.
Right.
One of the things that we talk about with clients is, and in a lot of presentation, is kind of the really big picture is culture. The very specific definition is behaviors. What's in between, kind of the umbrella in there, is their values.
Right.
Because you're not, here's my HR hat. I've used this quote many times in the last few weeks. People start to think about an exhaustive list of behaviors. You're never going to be able to come up with a full list of what behaviors you want to see and you don't want to see.
Right.
Similar to your HR handbook, right? Your employee handbook, you're never going to have a policy that is a full exhaustive list of everything that could potentially happen. It's about what is the spirit and the intent of the policy.
Yes.
And to me, that's where the values are. What's the spirit and the intent of the values through the behaviors and getting very specific in that area.
Yeah.
I feel like I totally jumped into theory there.
You're fine. And values we think of values as the fancy marketing stuff that's on your wall. Normally one of those has integrity in it at some point. Because I don't know that I've ever seen a set of values that hasn't had integrity in it. Now I'm going to have to think about that for a minute.
Well, and what's fascinating is later we'll get to the story about what happens when you define it. Because integrity, everybody's like, oh, well, everybody knows what that means. No, not necessarily.
No. Well, and that's the whole point, and why I like looking at behaviors as themes. Themes, can be the other way to call values too. That's how you bring them to life and showing what they are not. Defining both sides of that.
Yes. So this reminds me of a client that we worked with, a client that was actually going through a merger. And so they were bringing together two organizations, and they up front said, we know that we need to be very intentional about our culture.
Right.
Which they totally get bonus points for that. So they came up with their values. And then they were ready to go to start implementing it. And when we worked with them, we were saying, okay, it's great that you have these themes, these values. Let's get into what does this mean? And it was such a we facilitated this session using the foundation of their values and then brought them all together in a room and talked about, now what behaviors do you need to see, or what behaviors do you see that define these values, and which ones don't? And that was I remember the looks on their faces when they started to hear from each other about what some of those behaviors were. Sometimes it was the excitement around the level of clarity that came through in those behaviors. And sometimes it was I didn't think about it that way. And because of that, they, as a leadership team, got so clear on what their values were. It was an amazing day.
Yeah. Well, so some of the practicality too with having values defined by the specific behaviors that you have or either want to see or don't want to see. One of the things I don't think leaders understand as well as they could is that by having those defined, it makes so many of your other processes, including your feedback processes, easier to implement. So for instance, if I am trying to give somebody constructive feedback, or if something has happened and I need to address it, if I have, as an organization, defined what those behaviors are, what the values are in advance, now that conversation becomes a whole lot less of, well, Kristen, I just don't like you and I don't like what you did there. And I can instead point to something that the organization is about and say, okay, listen, what happened here, this behavior that I saw, that I heard, whatever it might be, this is in violation of one of our behaviors as an organization. And as a result, here's the consequence. Here's what's going to happen, because this needs to be addressed and it can't happen again. So it's not about you just because I don't like you.
Right.
It's about, this isn't consistent with what it means to be a part of this team.
Well, and what that brings me back to, so the same client that we worked with on really getting specific about the behaviors, one, they then built their values into a sentence.
They did.
That is overachieving.
There was multiple
amazing.
bonus points.
There were multiple bonus points there. So they could repeat all of their values in one sentence. And they used it so frequently in conversation that the leaders, an employee would do something and the leaders would say, hey, that's a great example of this.
Yes.
And they would reinforce it constantly to the extent where employees would mock them. Which, when I say mock, I mean that in a good way, because it means that employees were understanding that as well. And I remember, fast forward a year and a half later, we were back on site for another meeting with them. And one of the owners called the front desk at one of their locations. Service was one of their values. Called the front desk at one of their locations, and I don't know what the person said when they picked up the phone, but they didn't.
It wasn't right.
No, it didn't align with the behaviors that they had. And the owner said, "Now, is that really how we serve our customers? I'm going to hang up and call back, and let's try it again." And I loved that example of, it was in the moment. He tied to the values. I remember when he called back, he celebrated. Nice. Yes, that's exactly it.
Yes.
That it was that real time adjusting of behaviors and not a formal conversation, but like okay, tie back to the value. Let's try it again.
We talked in the last episode around business owners being in the business, right? Or GMs or CEOs being really in the business. Sometimes we don't have that opportunity to zoom out and work on the business. And working on things like values can feel really a lot like that's a nice to have. We'll get to that at some point, right? So why should a business owner, why should a leader prioritize this kind of work? What's in it for them to prioritize some of this work to define these things?
That is a great question, because it doesn't feel like it's top priority when you have customers calling.
Right. And that's why I thought it would be helpful for us to talk through that.
Yes. There is a quote about going slow so you can go fast. And that's what it reminds me of, is we're being very intentional about those definitions, because everything else gets better once we have that in place. It makes, we are People Spark, so we do talk about people and people practices. It makes your hiring easier because you know the kind of person that you want to hire because of those. It makes performance conversations easier. It makes your customer service better. I mean, I think of the two examples around how people showed service and how that was continued to be reinforced. That definition makes that easier. It increases employee engagement because they know more, they have more clarity about what's expected of them. It increases interactions with customers. It also makes decisions a lot easier. I think about, and I'll let you share the story, but a client that we've been working with recently who did a lot of work on their values and the behaviors that went along with it, they knew there was a focus on growth. And because they had their values in place, it made their decision-making easier
Right.
and ensured that they made a better decision. You worked more closely with them on that.
Yeah, and we've been with this working with this client for the last 5 or so years even. And yes, to your point, like they wanted to grow. They were looking at different opportunities for that, whether those were different acquisitions, whether that was expanding just their geography, a number of different things. And as those opportunities have come up over the last several years, their values have been part of the conversation of, okay, well, just because I might be acquiring another business doesn't mean that that existing business has the same level of attention on some of our values. So it allowed for them, it wasn't the sole decision maker. It was a contributing factor to what's going to be the right move for our business. Well, and I think of this too, because sometimes it can, right, as business owners ourselves, of thinking like, oh, I've got to go put myself in a room for a couple of hours or a couple of days to come up with these values. And that feels a little overwhelming of what's going to happen then with the rest of my business? What if people interrupt me, or where do I even start with it? And so that's why I wanted to get into this a little bit more, that it's not something that I think has to happen overnight. That's why I like to have people reflect on and pay attention to what they're seeing, what they're hearing, because I think their output is going to be a whole lot better as they're defining those values. And not everything has to happen overnight. It's something that can evolve. Especially as you start to see how it's impacting positively or otherwise what's happening in the business. So what are the business results looking like as you're defining this? And as you're starting to get comfortable with saying that this is part of what it means to exhibit this value and what it doesn't. Did you know that contrary to what we might think, 96% of employees want feedback, whether it's constructive or recognition? Yet another survey found that only 5% of managers provide critical feedback to employees, even though it's important for their development. What's behind this? Nearly half of managers, 44%, find giving feedback stressful. Nearly a quarter, 21%, avoid giving it altogether. They feel it's uncomfortable, they don't want to demotivate employees, and just aren't sure how to do it. And the repercussions of not giving feedback end up impacting you and your business through lower productivity and profitability, decreased employee engagement, and increased employee turnover. I'm Erin Meese with PeopleSpark Consulting. For the last several years, we've built our business around supporting ag supervisors and managers develop their coaching and feedback skills. Why? Because leaders coaching their teams create more engaged teams. And these more engaged teams create the workplaces that bring more employees into the ag industry. Our leadership transformation program was designed to be straightforward and practical, providing content in digestible chunks, supporting participants through personalized feedback, and providing participants an environment to learn with other ag leaders across the industry. You might only have a couple of managers or supervisors, or you might have an entire team of them. PeopleSpark works with you to find the best solution, whether it's joining an open cohort with other ag leaders or having a customized experience that works across your locations. In order to provide the most customized experience for each of our participants, these cohorts have very limited number of seats available each month. If you're interested in more information around what might work best for you and your team, just click on the link in the show notes below or directly go to developagleaders.com.
So our spark from in our previous conversations was to look and listen,
Right.
not apply judgment.
Right.
That when you start to apply judgment to it of these are the things that I want to see and these are the things that don't, if you don't have values already set, that's how they bubble up.
Right.
There are themes that come through in those behaviors, and those themes become the values.
Right.
And it's, we were just working with a client who was trying to come up with what their values would be. And we, based on conversations with them, were able to pull the behaviors they saw that they wanted to see and the behaviors they saw that they didn't want to see.
Right.
And we were able to identify those themes that were coming up. So that spark from the previous conversation is that stepping stone to start to identify what those values are. What I also think is fascinating about this is, so when we work with clients, I remember we were working with a cooperative that had a good culture, wanted to solidify it. So we were establishing their values to solidify the culture that they wanted to keep.
Right.
The concern was, and this is a concern we hear frequently, is the general manager had been the general manager for so long that he really drove the culture. And the concern was, as he was looking to retire, that if he left, the culture would change, and they didn't want to have that happen. So it was solidifying the culture the way it was before he left. And we listened to him, we identified some of the themes, and we shared back that here are the themes that we hear, here are the behaviors that do demonstrate that value, here are the behaviors that don't. And then I had to laugh. You and I were both on this call when he said, wow, this is really good. And we said, great, we're glad you think so, because they're all your words. We just organized them.
Yeah.
Which also tells me that business leaders, they know it. It's that translation from what's in your head to what's on paper. So I had to laugh. Like, he thought we did some had a miracle. I couldn't say miraculous right there, but I did pull it out. But there's some amazing thing when what we did was take what was in his head and put it on paper.
Exactly. And I don't think it has to be any more complicated than that. So it's looking at those themes, looking at what continues to come up over and over, and what does that mean? And sometimes it might even just be, who can I talk through this with? Because what are they hearing? So if I'm sharing all of these behaviors that I want to see, or that I am seeing and that I want to continue to see, or that I'm seeing and I don't want to continue to see, what does that mean to someone else too? And how can I define what that looks like for my business?
We just talked about how you identify your values once you have the behaviors, which is a great place to start. If you don't have values set and you have this list of behaviors that you've looked for and listened and watched for. We also have clients that have their values that were already established, similar to the example that we gave earlier today of here are our values. And we worked with one client and we asked what their values were. And I remember we were talking to a member of their leadership team, and she said, hold on, let me run to the conference room because they're hanging on the wall.
Yes.
which is the sign of great. It's great that you have values, and if they're only on the wall, they're not driving the behaviors and they're not impacting the culture. So it was a great first step. We actually did a facilitated session with them. It was fascinating. And the process that we went through for that is, okay, here is a value. So if we value integrity, if we value service, teamwork, those are common ones we hear, then we have each person in that room think about how well do we collectively demonstrate that value on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is we don't do it well at all. 10 is we are like rock stars. We role model it. It's consistent every day, and then anywhere in between. And we have them choose what that number would be. And then we ask questions about, now, what behaviors do you see that you feel brings you to that number?
Right.
And what behaviors do you want to see to get more of that? And what's fascinating about this is, first of all, we talk about it in terms of numbers. It's not about the numbers.
Right.
It is about how are you defining and describing those behaviors that tie to it. And in this specific session, we were talking about service. And everybody rated the group higher, 7s, 8s, maybe even some 9s.
And probably a team of 7 or 8 people even too.
Yeah. It wasn't a large team, wasn't a small team. And one person said, yes, we have a lot of service. And my employees serve our members really well because one of my team members delivered a 20-pound bag of birdseed to a member 20 miles away. And you could see he was proud of that behavior, and the rest of the team went, what?
Huh?
Because that's not how they defined service. Service was not we do everything for everybody.
Right.
It was the view from others was, we just spent over an hour of time for 20 pounds of birdseed when we have other customers that we are not serving because of
As a
that.
result. Yeah.
So we had a lot of really good discussion because we identified that discrepancy.
Well, and I think it becomes even more important to dig into the values as business strategy is changing too. So,
Yes.
in that example, one of the things that was happening in their business strategy was we need to be spending more of our time with our bigger members, with our bigger customers, because we have the most potential to grow our business, to grow across a variety of our different departments, whether that's energy, whether that's looking at agronomy, grain, feed. We have potential within our existing membership that needs to have attention given to it. And we need to prioritize that with our bigger customers to get there. And as that example came out, this happened to be right. And it's not that there's anything wrong with having some of your smaller customers. It was that particular behavior was going against what they had defined was important for their business strategy, which is putting the attention on our enterprise-wide or, our multi-department customer to get their business because we know that there's potential. There's nothing worse. For many of our businesses, any of our clients, especially those who are in kind of that co-op world that might be more diversified in some of their product, to know that we have their agronomy business, but we don't have their feed business,
Right.
or we have their agronomy business, we don't have their grain business. And so there had been a lot of attention spent on this is what we need to do because we have such potential here that hasn't been exercised by our existing membership.
Yeah. Such good conversation, such a great way to get everybody on the same page, and a great way to come up with the words
Right.
and examples to share that with others.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we said we would end every episode with a spark, one action that you could take.
Specifically from this conversation, it would be a build on the last spark. Looking at those behaviors, looking for what are the themes that these are telling me. Are these centered around teamwork? Are these centered around customer service? What are they centered around? And identify, this is the hardest part, 3 to 5, period, no more. 3 to 5 values then. What are those, the kind of that middle tier? We're talking about culture, we're talking about behaviors. What are the 3 to 5 values then that I have that I've identified within my business that are important for it? What would you add?
Well, I want to add something else, but I feel like it adds another spark. So, Erin,
Bonus spark.
this is a bonus spark, a sparkly spark, smaller spark, the after shower of a firework. The importance of using your own language.
Yeah.
That, we had
You don't have to make it HR speak. Please
No,
don't make
please
it
don't.
HR speak. Ugh.
Please don't make it sound like us. Teamwork, quality,
No,
service.
we're giving you the generic ones. We want you to get the
like
really
the ones
specific.
that really speak to you. We were working with a business owner at one point who wanted to have service, and it was fascinating. So his behavior that he did not want to see was, as customers were leaving and the customers say thank you, having one of his employees say no problem. That's what rubbed him the wrong
It
way.
chafed him.
It chafed him. It created blisters for
was
him.
blisters.
And the way he spoke about it is they are honoring us by coming into our store. We need to honor them in return. And we said, that's it. So their value was not service. Their value, as they defined it, was honor. And that making it sound like you. So a lot of times, especially if we work with 2 people, I say, listen to the other person's words.
Right.
Because that's where the power comes from, of making it really personal to you and your business.
Well, and there's the element of fun that can be added into that too. So one of our clients, one of their values, I mean, when we went through this exercise was like, I just want people to use common sense. And we said, great, that could be part of it. Like, let's define that. And they're like, okay, like use common sense. And here's what common sense means, right? Okay, great. Use the golden rule. What does that mean? Okay, let's talk about it. Let's make sure the behaviors are identified. That can be one of your values. In fact, please don't make it HR speak, because when it's HR speak, it doesn't stick It doesn't land. It doesn't stay with your employees in the same way. Like, use common sense.
We actually have a client whose one of their values is no BS,
Yeah.
because that's what they say. So, Erin's spark, identify the themes.
Yep.
My bonus spark, use your own words.
That's the level up spark.
That's the level up spark.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. I'm excited to continue this even further.
Absolutely. This has been the People Spark Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to bringing you more. The best way you can support us is by liking and subscribing this podcast wherever you subscribe to your podcasts.
Thank you so much for hanging with us today. We are looking forward to continuing the conversations with all of you.